The relentless rain had been a prelude, drumming against the windows of our small house, mirroring the storm brewing within me. It was a Tuesday in October, and the world outside felt as gray and mournful as the landscape of my own body. At 16, I was a stranger in my own skin, navigating a treacherous terrain of unwelcome curves and an unsettling softness. The living room, usually a sanctuary, had become a suffocating chamber, the only sounds the rhythmic tick-tock of the mantel clock and the relentless drumming of water against the roof. I sat hunched on the floral armchair, lost in the cavernous wool of an oversized sweater, one of many such garments, my shapeless knitted armor against a world that felt increasingly scrutinizing. Across from me, my mother, Alara, sat with an almost unnerving composure in her wingback chair, her hands serenely clasped in her lap. The soft glow of the table lamp beside her sculpted her face into a study of placid shadows and gentle light. She exuded an air of saintly patience, as if merely awaiting the perfect steep of a teacup. But I had seen the flicker in her eyes, a fleeting moment of apprehension when I had finally cornered her, my voice betraying me with a pitch that was neither masculine nor feminine, but a terrifying, lost echo in between. "I want to know what's wrong with me," I had whispered, the words acrid on my tongue. "I want to know why." Alara tilted her head, a gesture of almost practiced compassion that sent a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Leo, darling," she began, her voice a soothing balm, as smooth and rich as the nightly cream she massaged into her skin. "Nothing is wrong with you. You are becoming precisely who you were meant to be." "Meant to be?" I shot back, a desperate surge of anger emboldening me. My fingers fumbled with the collar of the t-shirt beneath my sweater, a futile attempt to hide the blossoming evidence. "Boys my age are growing beards. Their voices are dropping. Look at me." My hands trembled as I gestured vaguely at my own chest, at the undeniable softness there, the nascent curves that no amount of slouching could fully conceal. "My face is smooth. My hips. I don't fit in my own skin, Mom. And these," my voice hitched, "these vitamins you've had me on since I was a kid. What are they?" For the first time, a subtle, unreadable shift passed through her serene gaze. It wasn't quite guilt, more like a profound, almost zealous resolution, as if a long and arduous task was finally nearing its destined completion. She leaned forward, her expression morphing into one of intense earnestness, her eyes locking onto mine with an unwavering intensity. "Your father," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "when he left me, he broke something inside of me, Leo. He took my faith in men, in their strength, in their very nature. He was a storm, all thunder and selfish noise. And when he was gone, all I wanted was peace. All I wanted was a daughter." The mantel clock ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. A log in the fireplace hissed and popped, a mundane sound amplified in the sudden, monstrous silence that filled the room. Her words hung in the air between us, incomprehensible and utterly devastating. A daughter. The phrase echoed in the hollows of my mind, a chilling pronouncement that resonated with a terrible finality. "I prayed for a daughter when I was pregnant with you," she continued, her eyes welling with sincere, glistening tears that seemed to transform her sorrow into something almost sacred. "I dreamt of ribbons and lace, of whispered secrets and a gentle companion. When the doctors told me I had a son, I felt a coldness, a fear. I couldn't bear the thought of raising another storm, another man who might one day leave or disappoint or bring wreckage into a woman's life." My breath caught in my throat, a painful constriction that made me lightheaded. The floral pattern on the armchair swam before my eyes, blurring into an abstract design of betrayal. The vitamins. The constant refrain of my childhood, "Don't forget your vitamins, Leo. They'll keep you healthy." The innocuous phrase now carried a sinister weight, twisting every memory into a grotesque caricature. "So, I made a decision," she said, her voice unwavering now, imbued with a profound, almost terrifying sense of righteousness. "A mother's love is a powerful thing, darling. It can shape the world." She paused, her gaze still fixed on mine, as if expecting me to understand, to forgive. I found a doctor, a specialist in Europe, someone who understood. He helped me create a regimen. The little pills, the vitamins, they weren't for general health. They were hormonal balancers. Estrogen supplements primarily, designed to gently guide your development down a different path. She looked at me, her face glowing with a terrible, fierce love that chilled me to the bone. I couldn't let fate give me a son. Not when I knew in my heart that I was meant to have a daughter. I was simply helping nature along, correcting a small mistake. I stared at her, my mind a blank canvas of white noise, unable to process the enormity of her confession. Every memory of my life was suddenly recontextualized, twisted into a new and horrifying shape. The strange pains in my chest that she had so easily dismissed as growing pains. The way she had always encouraged my long hair, praising its softness and shine. The clothes she bought for me, always a little too soft, a little too androgynous, blurring the lines of boyhood. The way she had watched me, always with that same look of patient, determined sculpting, as if I were a work in progress, her personal masterpiece. I wasn't her son. I was her project, her creation, built to fulfill a void in her own life. The air left my lungs in a silent, agonizing rush. My mother hadn't just raised me, she had built me, bone by bone, hormone by hormone, into the image of her own profound desire. And in the lamplit quiet of our living room, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and rain, I finally understood that I had never truly known who I was at all. The boy named Leo was an illusion, a temporary dwelling for a spirit she had already claimed. To truly understand the architect, one must first understand her materials and the void around which she meticulously built her world. My father, Richard, was a ghost story in our house, a cautionary tale whispered over bowls of morning porridge. His name was uttered only with a sigh that could curdle milk. In our meticulously curated home, he was simply your father. He hadn't died, he had simply evaporated. One day, he was a volatile presence of pipe smoke and booming laughter, filling our small house with his tempestuous energy. The next, he was merely an empty space at the dinner table and a collection of forgotten boxes that quietly vanished from the attic, spirited away like unpleasant memories. After his departure, our world shrank to the comforting confines of our modest two-bedroom house and the secluded garden out back. Ilara cultivated this world with the same meticulous care she lavished on her prize-winning roses, tending to every detail with an almost obsessive devotion. It became a fortress of femininity, sealed tightly against the harsh, unpredictable winds of the masculine world she now so deeply distrusted. The air inside was perpetually thick with the soothing scents of lavender potpourri and baking bread, a fragrant blanket that enveloped me from infancy. The soundtrack of my childhood was the gentle hum of her sewing machine, weaving intricate patterns into fabric, and the classical music she played softly on the radio, a constant, calming presence. In this sealed terrarium, my mother was my sun, my moon, my entire sky. Her word was gospel, her touch was absolute comfort, and her love felt like the only undeniable truth I knew. And so, when she began the daily ritual of the vitamins, I accepted it as another intrinsic facet of that boundless, unquestioning love. I must have been 5 or 6. She would sit me down at the kitchen table, her smile radiating a beatific warmth that promised only good. "To keep you healthy and strong, my Leo," she would say, tapping a small, pearlescent pill from an amber bottle into the palm of my hand. In those early days, she would crush it diligently into my applesauce, her movements efficient and sure, never allowing me to question its purpose or taste. I trusted her implicitly, utterly, completely. Why wouldn't I? She was the one who bandaged my scraped knees, who read me stories until I drifted off to sleep, who promised to protect me from everything in the confusing world outside our walls. My first inkling that our world was fundamentally different from the one beyond our garden gate came, as so many profound childhood revelations do, through the mundane act of laundry. I was about 10, helping her sort the whites from the colors in the wicker basket on the utility room floor. I picked up one of my own pairs of blue jeans, the denim stiff and hardy, built for climbing trees and scuffing on pavement, robust and unyielding. Then my hand brushed against a pair of her trousers. They were a soft, flowing crepe fabric that felt like cool water against my fingertips, a silken caress in stark contrast to the rough texture of my own clothes. I held the two garments, one in each hand, a tangible representation of our diverging worlds. Mine was armor, sturdy and protective. Hers was a whisper, delicate and yielding. I pulled out one of her blouses, a silk shell in a pale ivory. It was weightless, almost ethereal, shimmering with an inner light, and felt impossibly delicate compared to the thick, practical cotton of my t-shirts. "Why are your clothes so soft?" I asked, the question genuine and uncalculated, born of pure, innocent curiosity. She paused her sorting, her hands still amidst the folds of fabric, and looked at the blouse in my hand, then at me. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across her face, softening her features. "Women's things are made to be beautiful, darling, to be gentle." She took the blouse from me, folding it with a reverence that struck me, as if it were something precious and fragile. "It's one of the perks, my love." The fascination bloomed from there, a quiet, internal burgeoning that began to reshape my understanding of the world. It was in the bathroom where I saw her stockings, translucent and mysterious, hanging to dry over the shower rail, shimmering like captured light. I'd seen a tear in one once, a ladder of broken thread running sensuously up the sheer fabric. "What's a run?" I had asked, comparing it to my own sturdy, hole-proof tube socks. "Oh, that's just something that happens," she'd said, her voice light and airy, dismissing it as a feminine secret. "It's a feminine frustration, my love. You don't have to worry about such things." But I did worry, or rather, I wondered. I became a secret scholar of her world, a silent observer of its subtle intricacies. I noticed the tiny, intricate clasps on her necklaces, the glossy click of her lipstick tube as she applied it, the floral cloud of her perfume that lingered in a room long after she'd left, a fragrant echo of her presence. Her world, I realized, seemed to be one of textures, scents, and subtle rituals, a stark and alluring contrast to my rough-edged existence of dirt, noise, and unyielding practicality. This growing obsession, this burgeoning fascination with the feminine, was a secret I kept coiled tightly in my chest, a clandestine bloom. It felt like a profound betrayal of the sturdy, simple boy my mother praised me for being, the boy I outwardly pretended to be. Yet, the pull was undeniable, an invisible current drawing me inexorably towards her world. Her bedroom became the epicenter of this captivating mystery. The door was usually kept ajar, and I would sometimes pause in the hallway, peering in at the vanity table with its array of gleaming crystal bottles and ornate brushes, at the soft duvet on the bed, at the way the afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, painting the room in a hazy, dreamlike glow. It was a sacred space, an inner sanctum, forbidden and alluring, and I knew with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying that someday, inevitably, I would have to cross its threshold. The opportunity to cross that hallowed threshold arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon when I was 11 years old. The school bus dropped me off at the end of our lane at precisely 3:15 p.m., as it always did, a steadfast rhythm in my unchanging world. But this day hummed with a different frequency. Ilara had left a note on the refrigerator, its perfect cursive looping elegantly across the page, a delicate script that announced a momentous shift in my routine. "Darling Leo, had to run to the city for a fabric order. Won't be back until after 6. Casserole is in the oven, just needs to be heated. Be good. Love, Mom." The house was empty. The silence wasn't the peaceful, comforting quiet of a shared space. It was a vacuum, humming with an almost palpable potential. My heart began to pound a frantic, exhilarating rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. The usual after-school routine, a glass of milk, a snack, homework at the kitchen table, evaporated from my mind, replaced by an invisible pull. I was drawn upstairs by an unseen string, my sneakers silent on the carpeted steps, a stealthy intruder in my own home. Her bedroom door, usually ajar, was now closed. Turning the cool brass knob felt like a momentous act, a point of no return from which there would be no retreat. The room smelled distinctly of her, that signature blend of rose water and lavender, a scent that was both deeply maternal and profoundly, mysteriously feminine. The afternoon sun, now low in the sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the floor, making the familiar space seem alien and charged with untold secrets. My target was the tall mahogany dresser that stood against the far wall. It was a piece of furniture I had seen every day of my life, yet it had always seemed like a monolithic altar, its contents a sacred mystery, inviolable and untouchable. My hands were clammy as I pulled open the top drawer. The first thing that enveloped me was the texture. Everything was impossibly soft. Silks and satins slithered over my fingertips, cool and liquid smooth, a sensation that was both alien and exquisitely alluring. I lifted a slip, a delicate garment of ivory silk trimmed with lace, its fabric so fine and weightless it seemed to pull in my hands like captured moonlight. I was almost afraid I would tear it with my clumsy touch. This was the material of her world, the ethereal fabric of her skin. The pervasive scent of her perfume was woven into every fiber, and I lifted the slip to my face, inhaling deeply. It was like breathing her in, a heavy, intoxicating experience that made my head spin with illicit pleasure and a strange sense of belonging. The next drawer held things that were more structured, more architectural. There were bras with intricate straps and molded cups that seemed impossibly complex, a feat of engineering designed to sculpt and uplift. And then I found it, a garment unlike anything I had ever seen or felt before. It was a pale peach color, constructed from a dense, powerfully elastic material reinforced with panels and seams. It had no legs, but it was long, designed to sculpt the torso. A girdle. I had heard the word before, a relic from old movies, but I had never seen one up close. It felt like flexible armor, both restrictive and powerfully transformative. I burrowed deeper, my initial caution giving way to a feverish, insatiable curiosity. In the bottom drawer, neatly folded stacks of stockings and pantyhose in shades from nude to jet black awaited. I pulled out a pair. The material was sheer and delicate, but the waistband was strong and snug, promising containment. For some inexplicable reason, a powerful urge, a primal command from a part of myself I didn't know existed, surged through me. Put it on. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the garment, a bizarre and clumsy struggle to understand its foreign construction. I sat on the edge of her plush bed, my own rough jeans and t-shirt suddenly feeling coarse and alien against my sensitized skin. Getting the stretchy, constricting thing up my legs was an awkward dance of pulling and wriggling, a comical but determined effort. But once it was on, stretching from my waist to my toes, a strange sensation washed over me. It was a feeling of containment, of being held. The pressure was snug and uniform, an all-encompassing embrace. The space between my groin and thighs felt congested and foreign, a puzzle of anatomy that didn't quite fit the mold I was attempting to force it into. And yet, despite the strangeness, a profound sense of rightness settled over me. It was bizarre, yes, but it was also deeply, primally satisfying. Intoxicated by the scent, the feel, the sheer illicit thrill of it all, my eyes landed on the vanity. A crystal bottle of her perfume sat gleaming in a sunbeam, a beacon of allure. I uncapped it, intending only to take another delicate sniff, but my trembling hands betrayed me. The bottle tipped, and a generous splash of the floral liquid cascaded down my front, soaking into my t-shirt and instantly amplifying her signature scent 100-fold. I was now enveloped in it, marked by it. I panicked, hastily replacing the cap and setting the bottle back in its exact, pristine spot. I glanced at the clock on her bedside table. 4:30. Time had warped, stretching and compressing in this secret world. I lay back on her bed, a boy in his mother's pantyhose, reeking of her perfume, my mind a swirling chaos of guilt, excitement, and a profound, unnameable pleasure. And in that moment of sensory overload, lost in the intoxicating forbidden, I failed to hear the sound of the front door opening downstairs, well over an hour before I had expected it. The sound, when it finally registered through the haze of my illicit pleasure, was the gentle click of the front door latch, followed by the soft, familiar thud of a handbag being dropped onto the entryway table. It was a sound as intimately known as my own heartbeat, yet at that precise moment, it was as jarring and terrifying as a thunderclap. My blood ran cold, and the exhilarating warmth that had filled me moments before turned to a chilling ice. She's home. Panic, raw and absolute, seized me, gripping my throat in an icy vice. My brain screamed a single, frantic command: hide. I scrambled off the bed, but the unfamiliar constriction of the pantyhose turned my legs into clumsy, foreign limbs. I stumbled, my feet tangling in the sheer fabric, and pitched forward. My immediate instinct was the bed. I had to get under the bed, disappear, cease to exist. I was halfway there, a pathetic, flailing creature on the floor, when the bedroom door swung open. Ilara stood in the doorway, framed by the softer light of the hall. She held a brown paper bag filled with fabric swatches in one arm, a domestic detail that seemed wildly out of place in this tableau of my undoing. Her expression was not one of anger or shock, not the parental fury I had braced myself for. It was something far more unnerving, a deep, unsettling calm, almost analytical. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with a slow, methodical gaze that missed nothing. She saw the open drawers, the disheveled piles of her most intimate apparel, strewn in my frantic search. She saw me, a tangle of limbs on the floor, naked from the waist up, my lower half encased in the faint sheen of her stockings, the peach girdle somehow still around my ankles. And then, her nostrils flared slightly, her head tilting almost imperceptibly as she registered the overwhelming cloud of her own perfume that saturated the air, a telltale vapor of my transgression. My attempt to escape was pitiful, futile. I was pinned by her gaze, trapped like an insect in amber. The girdle, which I had somehow managed to wrestle down to my ankles in my desperate scramble, now formed a restrictive hobble, binding me in place. Shame, hot and prickly, washed over me, a physical force that made me want to shrink into the very floorboards, to become invisible. I was exposed, not just physically, but in a way that felt so profound, so deep that it cut to the core of my being. My secret, my strange and confusing fascination, was laid bare under the quiet, assessing light of her eyes. I braced myself for an explosion, for yelling, for tears, for the kind of parental fury I'd seen other kids endure. But it never came. She simply closed the door behind her, shutting us in together, sealing our shared secret within the room. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, a palpable presence. She walked over to the bed, placed her fabric bag down with deliberate care, and then looked back at me. I couldn't decipher the look on her face. It was a complex tapestry of emotions I was too young and too terrified to unravel. There was something that looked like pity, something that resembled understanding, and most terrifying of all, something that looked undeniably like triumph. "Get up, Leo," she said, her voice even and soft, betraying no anger, no harshness whatsoever. "Get dressed." Her calmness was more terrifying than any rage could have been, a quiet power that unnerved me to my core. I fumbled with the girdle at my ankles, my fingers clumsy and useless, tangled in the elastic. She knelt, her movements fluid and graceful, and with an efficiency that spoke of long familiarity with such garments, she unhooked and freed me. She then helped me peel off the stockings, her touch impersonal and clinical, as if she were assisting a child with a difficult task, devoid of judgment. She didn't say a word as I scrambled back into my own t-shirt and jeans, the rough denim now feeling like a harsh punishment against my sensitized skin, a stark reminder of the identity I was supposed to inhabit. That night, we ate the macaroni and cheese casserole in near total silence. The only sounds were the scrape of forks against ceramic plates and the relentless ticking of the mantel clock, each tick echoing the unspoken in the room. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach with every bite. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the lecture, the punishment, the questions I had no answers for. But the questions never came. The lecture never happened. After dinner, she simply said, "Time for bed, darling," her voice still unnervingly soft. I went in my room and crawled under the covers, my body shivering despite the warmth of the house. I was terrified, yes, but beneath the fear was a strange and powerful undercurrent of excitement. The sensations of the afternoon, the silk on my skin, the scent of her perfume, the snug embrace of her clothes, were branded into my memory, an indelible mark. The silence from her room was absolute. It was not a silence of forgiveness, nor one of anger. It felt, chillingly, like a silence of contemplation, of careful planning. That silence would stretch on unbroken for an entire year. And in that year of unspoken truths, something in our house and something deep within me began to fundamentally and irrevocably shift. The year that followed the incident in my mother's bedroom was a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged with silence and a chilling, unspoken understanding. On the surface, nothing changed. We maintained our routines with a brittle precision that masked the seismic shift beneath. Breakfast at 7:30, school, homework, dinner, bed. Ilara never once mentioned what she had seen. There were no knowing glances, no pointed remarks, no veiled accusations. But the air between us had irrevocably changed. It was charged, thick with the memory of that afternoon, a shared secret that sat at our dinner table like a third, invisible guest, its presence suffocating. For my part, I became a model son. I scrubbed the secret clean from my outward behavior, locking the memory and the strange, burgeoning desires away in a deep, dark vault within myself. The mahogany dresser in her room remained a forbidden temple, its allure now tainted with the poison of discovery and shame, a place I now actively avoided. But a secret, like a seed, cannot be locked away forever. It needs only the right conditions to germinate, to push through the soil of suppression and blossom into something undeniable. A year to the day after my discovery, a sweltering Saturday in the thick of summer, Ilara sent me to the garage to find the box of old Christmas decorations. She was in a rare festive mood, planning a Christmas in July dinner for the two of us, a whimsical notion to break the oppressive monotony of the heat. The garage was our house's forgotten attic, a dusty repository for the past, a place where time itself seemed to linger. It smelled of motor oil, dried leaves, and faded memories. Sunlight streamed in through a grimy window, illuminating dancing dust motes, making the air thick with suspended particles. I found the Christmas box easily enough, tucked away in its usual corner. But behind it, shoved further into the forgotten depths and covered by a moth-eaten canvas tarp, were several other cardboard boxes, sealed with yellowed, brittle tape. These weren't Christmas decorations. They were heavier, more densely packed, solid and weighty. A flicker of that old, forbidden curiosity, dormant for a year, sparked within me, a dangerous ember catching flame. My mother was busy in the kitchen, the distant sounds of clanking pots and pans a clear signal that I was, for the moment, unobserved, utterly alone with this burgeoning mystery. With a sense of predestined discovery, an almost fatalistic certainty, I used my pocket knife to slit the tape on the nearest box. I lifted the cardboard flaps, and my breath caught in my throat. It was the mother lode. The box was a time capsule of a life I'd never known, a secret history waiting to be unearthed. It was filled not with my mother's current elegant wardrobe, but with clothes from another era, vibrant and almost garish in their untouched newness. There were slacks in bright, bold patterns, high-waisted and flared at the bottom, emblematic of a bygone decade. There were blouses with dagger-point collars and psychedelic swirls of orange and brown, a dizzying array of textiles. Deeper still, I found skirts in wool and corduroy, a rainbow of A-line and pencil silhouettes, each one pristine. This wasn't just a collection of old clothes. It was a complete, meticulously curated identity, preserved perfectly. I opened the next box, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum against my chest. This one contained the underpinnings. Neatly folded and layered with tissue paper were dozens of girdles, garter belts, and long-line bras, more varied and even more architecturally complex than the ones in her current collection. And there were stockings. So many stockings, still in their original glossy packaging, from brands that no longer existed, a testament to their age. It was a treasure trove, a secret history of someone else's femininity, packed away and preserved, waiting for discovery. But as I looked closer, a disquieting realization began to dawn on me. Something was off. While the styles were clearly from the 70s, the era of her youth, the clothes themselves seemed completely unworn. The creases were too perfect, the colors too vibrant, unfaded by time or use. They looked brand new, as if they had just come off a factory line. And then I saw it. Tucked carefully in the bottom of the second box was a smaller, shoebox-sized container. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, were earrings, brooches, and clip-on bangles, an array of costume jewelry. And beneath them, partially obscured, was a faded photograph. It was a picture of my parents, taken long before I was born. My father, Richard, was handsome and laughing, his arms slung casually around a woman who was definitely not my mother. This woman was petite and fiery-looking, with a cascade of dark, untamed hair and a wide, joyful smile that seemed to light up the photograph. She was wearing a pair of patterned slacks and a blouse identical to the ones in the box, a direct match. A small, elegant handwritten inscription on the back read, "Richard and Diane, Summer 78. A cold, confusing realization dawned on me, chilling me even in the stifling heat of the garage. These weren't my mother's clothes. They belonged to this other woman, Diane. Who is she? And why did my mother have her entire wardrobe packed away in our garage, meticulously preserved? The logic of it didn't matter. The sheer, intoxicating opportunity of the discovery did. The volume of the find was overwhelming, intoxicating. The shame and fear that had kept me in check for a year, that had held my desires captive, dissolved in a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated bliss. The voice in my head, the one that had commanded me to put it on a year ago, was back, and this time, it was screaming. I didn't hesitate. I stripped off my shorts and t-shirt right there in the dusty heat of the garage, shedding the last vestiges of my assigned identity. I chose a pair of silky, high-waisted navy slacks and a cream-colored blouse with delicate pearl buttons. The fabrics felt divine against my skin, a second skin, a true skin. I struggled with the hooks and eyes of a long-line bra, its unfamiliar architecture a fascinating puzzle to master. Finally, I rolled on a pair of sheer stockings, clipping them to a delicate garter belt, the subtle tension a comforting embrace. Clothed in the identity of a ghost, in the wardrobe of a woman I had never known, I felt more myself than I ever had before, more authentically me than Leo had ever been. The dusty garage transformed into a private sanctuary, the single sunbeam cutting through the grimy window now a spotlight on my transformation. I moved, letting the fabric flow around me, reveling in the sensation of it, the rustle of silk, the gentle clasp of the garter. At that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the strange woman in the photograph, not the oppressive heat, not the terrifying risk of discovery. There was only the rustle of silk, the delicate pressure of the garter, and the profound, soul-deep certainty that this was right. This was me. I was so lost in the euphoria, so completely absorbed in this stolen identity, that I didn't hear the back door creak open. I didn't hear the soft footsteps on the concrete floor until it was too late. Leo, my mother's voice. It wasn't soft this time. It was sharp, clear, and resonant with an authority I had never heard before, cutting through my blissful reverie like a steel blade. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, already recognizing the inevitable. She stood there, a wooden spoon still in her hand, her face an unreadable mask of complex emotions. My attempt to duck behind the lawnmower, a clumsy, futile gesture, was already too late. I was caught again. This time, there would be no silence. "We need to talk," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument, for negotiation. The trial of the past year was over. The verdict was about to be read. The walk from the garage back to the house was the longest journey of my life, each step an excruciating march towards an unknown fate. My bare feet patted silently on the cool linoleum of the kitchen, the silky fabric of Diane's slacks whispering around my ankles with every terrified movement. I felt utterly exposed, a fraudulent doll dressed in a dead woman's clothes, every fiber of the borrowed identity now prickling with a crushing shame. Eleanor gestured with the wooden spoon towards the living room, a silent command I immediately obeyed, perching on the very edge of the armchair where the first silent confrontation had taken place a year prior. This time, however, she did not sit. She paced. The calm, serene mask she usually wore had vanished, replaced by an intense, agitated energy that crackled in the air. I knew this day would come, she began, her back to me as she stared out the window at her pristine, meticulously cultivated garden, her voice tight with a mixture of resignation and something harder. I suppose I should have gotten rid of those boxes, but there was a part of me that couldn't. She turned to face me, her eyes boring into mine with an unnerving intensity. You are so much like her. Like who? I whispered, my voice barely a squeak, lost somewhere between fear and a burgeoning understanding. A shadow of pain, fleeting but profound, crossed my mother's face. Diane. She was your father's first wife. He left her for me. And when he left me, he went back to her. Her gaze dropped to the clothes I was wearing, a flicker of something akin to distaste in her eyes. Those boxes were sent here by mistake during one of their moves. I never sent them on. She paused, her voice tinged with a bitterness that surprised me. She was everything I wasn't. Loud, vibrant, carefree. He always loved that. The confession hung in the air, heavy and sad, a testament to old wounds that had never truly healed. But her sorrow quickly hardened back into resolve. She stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, forcing me to look up at her, to meet her unyielding gaze. I asked you a year ago, with my silence, to stop this, she said, her voice low and firm, resonating with an authority I hadn't known she possessed. You chose not to. You chose to go looking for it again. So now we will do this my way. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped me. I thought this was it. The punishment, the therapy, the end of my secret life, the forceful return to the boy I was supposed to be. I braced myself, my body tensing for a blow, verbal or otherwise, for the crushing pronouncement of my fate. I like it, I blurted out, the words tumbling from me in a desperate, tear-choked rush, a raw, uncontrollable confession. I like dressing in them. The clothes, they feel right. The admission felt like ripping a layer of skin off, exposing a raw nerve. I buried my face in my hands and began to sob, great, racking gasps of shame and relief mingling together. I expected her to recoil, to express disgust, to finally unleash the anger I had anticipated for so long. Instead, I felt her hand on my head, her fingers gently stroking my hair, a gesture of unexpected tenderness. I know, darling, she whispered, her voice softening into that old, soothing cadence, laced with an unnerving understanding. I've always known. The conversation ended there, dissolving into the quiet aftermath of my tears. I sobbed myself into exhaustion, and eventually, she gently guided me to my bed, where I collapsed and shivered myself to sleep, still wearing the stranger's blouse, a garment now imbued with a new, complicated meaning. A week of tense, watchful silence followed. It was different from the silence of the previous year. That had been a Cold War, a stalemate of unspoken truths. This was a truce, a period of quiet negotiation, a careful reevaluation of our shared world. Then, one morning at breakfast, as I was listlessly pushing my porridge around my bowl, she set a new bottle of pills on the table beside my plate. They were different from the small, pearlescent vitamins of my childhood. These were larger, chalky, and scored down the middle, a more serious proposition. You're getting older, Leo, she said, her tone matter-of-fact, almost clinical. Your body has different needs now. It's important you take these every morning. It's a new vitamin regimen. I was 12 years old. I looked at the pills, then at her face. Her expression was one of unwavering maternal authority and unspoken demand. The implicit agreement was clear, my compliance for her acceptance, my secret safe, as long as I followed her rules, her new, unspoken path. So, I swallowed the pill without a word, the chalky taste dissolving on my tongue, and continued eating my porridge, my fate sealed with a silent swallow. The next 2 years of my life were a study in profound contrasts, a delicate balance between an inner burgeoning and an outward conformity. Academically, I soared. I retreated into the boundless world of books and art, my mind becoming a sanctuary where I could be creative, expressive, and intellectually stimulated without judgment or scrutiny. It was a safe harbor for the parts of me that yearned for definition, a place where I could explore identities on paper and canvas without fear of exposure. Socially, however, I was an island, drifting in a sea of my rapidly changing peers. I was excused from physical education classes with a doctor's note, conveniently provided by my mother, citing a vague and unspecified medical condition. This suited me perfectly. The rough and tumble world of the boys' locker room, with its boisterous energy and harsh realities, was a foreign and terrifying landscape, a place where my burgeoning differences would be undeniably exposed. I couldn't comprehend the other boys' burgeoning obsession with girls, their loud jokes, their competitive posturing, their relentless drive for dominance. Instead, I found a quiet camaraderie with the girls, who seemed to operate on a wavelength I instinctively understood. We talked about feelings, about art, about the subtle, intricate dramas of school life, their emotional landscapes mirroring my own internal complexities. Yet, even there, I was an outsider, a gentle anomaly they couldn't quite categorize. "You're different from other guys, Leo," my friend Sarah told me once, as we sat on a bench during lunch, her eyes kind and knowing. "You actually listen. It's like you get it." I did get it, in a way I couldn't articulate, a deep, intuitive understanding that transcended gender roles. I was alone, mostly, in my private world. But every morning, without fail, I took my vitamins. Then, 6 months after the incident in the garage, the physical changes began in earnest, a subtle but undeniable transformation orchestrated by those chalky pills. A persistent, deep ache started in my chest. It was a tender, bruised feeling that made me flinch if I bumped into anything, a constant, low-level throb. "Mom, it hurts," I told her one evening, gesturing vaguely to my chest, a desperate plea for understanding. "Right here." She looked at me with that same unnervingly calm expression, a quiet knowing in her eyes. "Let me see," she said. In the privacy of my room, I took off my shirt, my vulnerability laid bare. She gently, almost clinically, palpated the area around my nipples. Her touch was firm and knowing, an expert assessment. I could feel it too, a small, hard lumpiness beneath the skin, a knot of tissue that hadn't been there before, a foreign presence. My heart pounded with a new kind of fear, a primal terror that eclipsed even the shame of discovery. "Cancer? A tumor? Is it bad?" I asked, my voice trembling, a childlike tremor. She smoothed my hair back from my forehead, her smile serene and reassuring, utterly devoid of concern. "No, darling." "Not at all," she said, her voice a comforting balm, a soothing lie. "This is perfectly natural. It's just a part of growing up." Middle school was a crucible, an unforgiving gauntlet of physical and emotional change. It was the age of accelerated development, a biological arms race where boys' voices dropped like stones and patches of faint fuzz appeared on their upper lips, marking their transition into manhood. For me, it was an age of a different, more subtle and terrifying transformation. While my peers were shooting up in height and sprouting Adam's apples, their bodies conforming to a predictable masculine trajectory, my body was embarking on a divergent, secret path, orchestrated by the daily ritual at the breakfast table. My mother, Ilara, became the meticulous curator of my evolving appearance, guiding my transformation with an artist's precision. "Your hair is so lovely, Leo," she would say, running a brush through the long, soft strands, a silken curtain. "Let's keep it long. It suits your face." She bought me jeans that were cut for a slimmer waist and wider hips, styles that were technically for boys, but which draped on my changing frame in a way that subtly blurred the lines, hinting at the curves beneath. The mirror became a place of morbid fascination, a canvas of change. I'd stand before it after a shower, cataloging the transformations with a complex mix of horror and a strange, unbidden thrill. The lumpiness in my chest was no longer a subtle knot. It was softening, swelling, creating a gentle but undeniable curve, a nascent feminine form. There was no hair on my chest, my arms, or my legs. My skin remained smooth, almost porcelain, my jawline soft, unmarred by the coarse stubble of my peers. My waist began to taper inward, while my hips and thighs seemed to swell, giving my body a gentle, pear-like shape that made my standard-issue boys' jeans fit awkwardly, bunching and pulling in unfamiliar ways. By the time I entered high school at 14, the divergence was impossible to ignore, an undeniable truth etched onto my very being. A few of the boys were cultivating wispy mustaches, their attempts at masculinity both comical and intimidating. My face remained as smooth as polished stone, unblemished by the slightest hint of stubble. I began to wear baggy sweaters and loose, untucked shirts, a shapeless uniform, a desperate attempt to hide the evolving topography of my body. But the deception was becoming harder to maintain. My chest had developed beyond mere puffiness into small, distinct breasts. They were larger than those of some of the girls in my grade, a fact that burned in my consciousness every time I had to change for the rare gym class I couldn't avoid. The loose t-shirt was no longer enough. I began wearing a tight undershirt beneath it, a desperate attempt to flatten the evidence, to force my body back into its assigned mold. My social world continued its strange bifurcation. The boys, with their deepening voices and swaggering gaits, treated me with a mixture of confusion and derision. My own voice remained stubbornly in a higher register, clear and melodic, a source of constant mockery. Leo sings soprano, one of them had crowed in the hallway. A jibe that stuck, a cruel label. I learned to speak less, to keep to the periphery, my silence becoming a shield against their barbs. The girls, however, drew closer. They confided in me, sharing secrets they swore they wouldn't tell another soul, drawn to my empathy and quiet understanding. This duality created a churning sea of confusion inside me, a turbulent water on which another, more frightening ship set sail, attraction. I found my eyes lingering on some of the boys. Not in the loud, performative bravado that my male peers exhibited when they watched girls, but with a quiet, intense yearning that was both terrifying and electrifying. I'd watch Mark, the captain of the soccer team, his muscles taut as he ran across the field, and feel a dizzying, hollow ache in my stomach. I'd hear the easy, deep laugh of David from my history class and feel a blush creep up my neck, a telltale sign of my forbidden desires. These feelings were dangerous, impossible. They were another layer of abnormality to be hidden away beneath the baggy sweaters, a betrayal of the boy I was supposed to be. The dissonance between my birth certificate and my burgeoning reality was becoming a deafening roar. Strangers, more often than not, would call me Miss or Young Lady from behind, only to offer a flustered apology when I turned around, their faces registering confusion. And the most confusing part, a secret, shameful part of me, loved it. Each time it happened, a small, warm thrill would run through me, a fleeting moment of profound recognition before the shame and correction set in. I was 15, a chimera of a person living in a body that felt like a beautiful, terrifying betrayal. The questions I had suppressed for years began to bubble to the surface, too powerful to contain, too insistent to ignore. It was time to confront the architect, to demand answers from the woman who had shaped my very being. I found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she arranged freshly cut flowers in a vase, a picture of domestic serenity. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding a fierce rhythm against my ribs, and waited for her to notice me. "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, laced with a new resolve. "We need to talk. For real, this time." She turned, her smile faltering slightly as she saw the desperate, unyielding determination in my eyes. She wiped her hands on her apron, her movements slow and deliberate, preparing for the inevitable. "I know, darling," she said softly, her voice filled with a preternatural calm. "I think it's time I told you everything." She led me to the living room, to the two chairs that had become our silent stage for these life-altering confessions. She sat opposite me, her hands folded serenely in her lap, and finally, she laid her entire grand design bare. She spoke, her voice weaving a narrative of heartbreak and profound disillusionment. She recounted her agony over my father's departure, his selfish abandonment, and the crushing blow it dealt to her faith in men, in their strength, in their very nature. Her dream, born from that wreckage, was all-consuming. She craved a daughter. She confessed to her early decision, made in the secret chambers of her pregnant heart, the clandestine consultation with the European doctor, the carefully calibrated regimen of hormones disguised as innocuous vitamins. She cried as she spoke, not with guilt, not with remorse, but with the fervent passion of a zealot explaining their deepest faith. "I couldn't have a son, Leo," she wept, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't face it. I wanted my little girl. I wanted you to be my daughter." We sobbed together then, a messy, cathartic torrent of tears. Hers for the dream she had violently willed into existence, for the daughter she had sculpted from the clay of her desire. Mine for the boy I was supposed to have been, the identity stolen, and for the person I had inexplicably become, a stranger in a body that was both familiar and profoundly alien. The years of confusion, the constant dull ache of not belonging, the secret shame that had shadowed my every waking moment, all coalesced into a single, staggering truth. My life had not been my own. I was not a product of nature's whim, but of a mother's desperate, all-consuming will. When the tears finally subsided, replaced by a quiet, raw exhaustion, she looked at me, her eyes shining with a feverish excitement, a conspiratorial gleam. "Now," she said, her voice filled with an almost divine certainty, "I have some surprises for you. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time." And as she led me to my own bedroom, my heart a drumbeat of terror and anticipation, I knew with a chilling certainty that the unraveling of Leo was complete. The next stage of my mother's grand creation was about to begin. My bedroom, the last bastion of my supposed boyhood, had been utterly transformed, shedding its old skin like a chrysalis. In the corner where my battered desk once stood, scarred with the history of homework and secret sketches, there was a new piece of furniture, a beautiful white lacquered dresser with delicate crystal-knobbed drawers. It was a feminine, elegant piece, a stark, almost defiant contrast to the fading posters of bands and sci-fi movie characters still tacked to my walls. It was an altar, meticulously prepared for a new self, a new existence. "Go on," Alara urged, her voice trembling with barely contained anticipation, her excitement palpable. "Open it." My hand shook as I pulled open the top drawer. It was lined with delicately scented paper that released a cloud of lily of the valley, an ethereal fragrance. Inside, nestled in neat rows, were things I had only ever seen in magazines, in whispered glimpses of the feminine world, barrettes sparkling with rhinestones, soft velvet headbands in an array of colors, and a small, velvet-lined box containing a pair of simple, gleaming pearl stud earrings. This wasn't a collection of found clothes from a ghost's past, no relics of Diane. This was all for me. A wardrobe for the daughter she had so patiently and meticulously built. The next drawer down held an impossible treasure, pajamas made of soft brushed cotton, so luxurious against the skin, and nightgowns of flowing, silky jersey, promising comfort and grace. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound that was equal parts terror and a profound, soul-deep relief. The fear of the unknown battled with the exhilaration of finally being seen, finally being understood. "It's time we had a real talk," she said gently, her voice now imbued with a tenderness I hadn't heard since my earliest childhood. A mother-daughter talk. And so we did. For hours, I poured out everything that had been coiled within me for so long, the fear, the confusion, the secret thrill of being called Miss, the terrifying, exhilarating attraction I felt towards boys that I had suppressed as an anomaly. I told her about the suffocating weight of my secret, the loneliness of being an alien in my own life, the dissonance that had screamed within me for years. She listened, not as an architect reviewing her finished work, but as a confidant, a co-conspirator in a journey she had begun. The morning I sat down with her after that talk, I took my vitamins, but this time it wasn't an act of blind obedience, of helpless compliance. It felt like a conscious choice, a decisive step onto a path she had laid, but one I was now choosing to walk. "There's one more thing," she said, her eyes gleaming with a new, almost manic excitement. I've been saving diligently, and I've maintained my relationship with an excellent physician. The next 2 hours were a dizzying spiral of possibilities, a vision of a future I had never dared to dream. I stood before my mirror, the same mirror that had been my tormentor, cataloging my unwanted curves and unmasculine softness, and I truly looked. I saw the soft curves, the long hair, the gentle slope of my shoulders. The face looking back at me was not the face of a boy named Leo. It was something else entirely. To continue living as I was, a boy in appearance, but a girl in every other way, felt like a lie. A more painful lie even than the one I had been living for years, a betrayal of my own nascent truth. But there was still the final, undeniable piece of anatomy that tethered me to my birth certificate, the ultimate contradiction that shouted my assigned gender to the world. "That can be corrected, my love," my mother had said, her voice full of an almost divine certainty, an unwavering conviction. "Modern medicine is a miracle. We can make your body whole. We can make it match your spirit." The decision, when I finally made it, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. The final, resonant click of a lock falling into place, a destined completion. The day of the surgery, I was numb with a mixture of terror and hope, a swirling vortex of emotions. I registered at the private facility, a pristine, quiet place that felt a world away from my tumultuous life, a sanctuary for transformation. I was drugged, a cool liquid flowing into my veins, a gentle oblivion. And then I was asleep, surrendering to the hands of fate and of my mother's design. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was a nurse's kind, reassuring face, her voice a gentle murmur telling me everything had gone perfectly. The second thing I saw was my mother sitting by my bedside, her face illuminated by a joy so profound it was almost holy, a beatific glow. She had her daughter. There was no turning back.